Yes, it was me. With a heart full of a poison I had mistaken for faith, it was my voice that silenced my mother's prayers with a shout. It was my hand that held the tire iron. In the middle of our town's annual Christmas Eve tree lighting, surrounded by the scent of pine and the sound of families singing Silent Night, I pushed my way through the crowd. And with my steel-toed work boots, caked in mud and a blinding arrogance, I took that tire iron to the centerpiece of our town's most beloved tradition, the hand-carved nativity scene. Specifically, to the plaster statue of the Virgin Mary, the one that had been in our community for generations. I remember the sound it made, a sickening crack that cut through the music. The painted wood splintered, her serene face split in two, and she lay shattered on the cold pavement under the horrified gaze of the entire town. That day, in my mind, idolatry was dead. I had won. My name is Arthur, and I'm 62 years old now. The hands that tell this story are weathered and slow, not the angry, clenched fists of the boy I was at 20. I live in a quiet little house not far from that same town square in Ohio, a place where traditions run as deep as the roots of the old oak trees. To understand the man who could do such a thing, you have to understand the world I came from. My mother, Helen, was the gentlest soul I've ever known. She was a devout, lifelong Catholic. Her faith wasn't loud. It was in the smell of yeast rolls baking on a Saturday morning, in the quiet click of her rosary beads as she prayed by her window in the evening light. It was a soft, warm blanket. My sister, Sarah, 2 years older, was the family's frantic diplomat, always trying to build a bridge between my mother's quiet tradition and the raging fire I'd become. You see, I had been saved. About 6 months before that Christmas Eve, I'd stumbled into a non-denominational church run by a man named Pastor Eli. He was magnetic. He spoke of faith not as a blanket, but as a sword. He preached with a certainty that electrified the room, a fire and brimstone gospel that made everything seem so simple, so black and white. There was God, and there was the devil. There was truth, and there was deception. And in his eyes, the statues my mother prayed to, the rosaries she held, the very idea of asking a saint to intercede, it was all deception. It was idolatry, plain and simple, a direct violation of God's law. I drank it all in. For a young man who felt lost and powerless, this certainty was like a drug. I finally had a mission. I was a soldier for God. My first battlefield was my own home. I started small. I'd walk into the living room while my mother was praying her rosary, and I'd say, "Mom, you know you're praying to a statue, right? That's a graven image. You're supposed to pray to God alone." She would just look at me, her eyes filled with a sad confusion, and whisper, "Arthur, honey, I'm not praying to her. I'm asking her to pray with me." It was a distinction my newfound zeal couldn't comprehend. To me, it was a loophole for idol worship. The arguments got worse. I'd take the little statue of St. Francis from her garden and hide it. I'd corner my sister and preach at her for an hour, telling her she was lukewarm, that her casual attendance at the old Catholic church was a ticket to hell. I saw myself as a rescuer, a spiritual surgeon cutting out the cancer of false religion from my own family. I couldn't see the pain I was causing. I only saw my righteous crusade. The nativity scene in the town square became my obsession. It represented everything Pastor Eli railed against. It was a public display of what I considered paganism disguised as Christianity. People bowing their heads, leaving flowers. It made my blood boil. Smashing that statue wasn't an impulse. It was a premeditation. I thought about it for weeks. I saw it as a necessary act, a violent sermon to wake up the whole town. I convinced myself that if I could just shatter the symbol, I could shatter the delusion. I believed with every fiber of my being that I was doing God's work. So on that Christmas Eve, as my mother and sister stood there, their faces glowing in the light of the town Christmas tree, I walked past them. I didn't see the joy in their eyes. I didn't hear the beauty in the carols. All I saw was an idol, and all I felt was the cold, heavy weight of the tire iron in my hand. The silence after the crack of that plaster was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was the sound of a heart, a family and a community breaking all at once. And I was the one who broke it. This was the man I was, so sure of his truth that he was willing to destroy anything and anyone who didn't share it. This is just the beginning of my story. If what I've shared so far has resonated with you, if it sparked something in your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. It helps more than you know. And I'd truly love to know where you're watching from, so please leave a comment below and tell me what city or country you're in. Your support means the world to me, and I promise the rest of this story is a journey you won't want to miss. Now let me tell you what happened in the hours after I shattered that statue. The walk home was a blur of angry whispers and averted eyes. I felt like a prophet walking through a den of vipers. I didn't see the tears on old Mrs. Gable's face or the way my own sister, Sarah, grabbed our mother's arm to steady her. All I saw was a field I had just tilled for God. I was so full of adrenaline and righteous fire that the cold night air barely touched me. I expected to get home and have a fight. I was ready for it, armed with scripture and the unwavering certainty of Pastor Eli's sermons. I had my arguments lined up, my condemnations polished and ready. But the scene that met me was far more disarming than any argument. My mother wasn't crying when I walked in. That would have been easier. No, she was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded over her rosary, her face a mask of grief so profound it looked like she was carved from stone. The shattered pieces of her faith weren't just on the town square pavement. They were right there in our little kitchen. Sarah was the one who spoke first. Her voice, usually so calm and mediating, was shaking with a rage I'd never heard from her before. "Are you proud of yourself, Arthur? Are you happy now?" I opened my mouth to launch into my sermon about graven images, about the second commandment, but the words caught in my throat. My mother looked up at me and her eyes weren't angry. They were filled with a deep, bottomless well of confusion and pain. "Why, Arthur?" she whispered, and her voice was so fragile it barely made a sound. "That statue. My grandmother helped paint her face when the town first got her. She was a part of us." I tried to answer. I really did. I said something about idolatry, about true worship, but the words sounded hollow even to me. They were Pastor Eli's words, not mine, and they offered no comfort in the face of my mother's raw, human sorrow. "You didn't just break a statue," Sarah said, stepping between us. "You broke her heart. You broke this family. For what? So your new friends at that church can pat you on the back?" That was it. The accusation that my faith wasn't my own, that I was just a puppet for Pastor Eli. It lit a fuse inside me. The righteousness returned, hotter than before, but this time it was mixed with shame, and that's a dangerous combination. "You don't understand," I yelled. "None of you do. You're all blind, content to worship your dolls and your traditions. I did what had to be done. I did it for God." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I wasn't doing it for God. I was doing it for me, for the feeling of power, for the feeling of being right. The argument exploded. It was ugly and loud, and we said things that night that still echo in my memory, things I've spent a lifetime trying to take back. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stand being in that house, suffocating under the weight of the pain I had caused. I grabbed my worn leather jacket and the keys to my old motorcycle. "I'm leaving," I spat. "I can't be around this poison anymore." My mother just closed her eyes. Sarah shouted my name as I slammed the door, but I didn't look back. The engine of my motorcycle roared to life, a defiant growl in the quiet, wounded night. I tore out of our driveway and sped down the main street, past the town square where a small group of people were now trying to gather the broken pieces of the Virgin Mary. I didn't feel triumph. I felt nothing. Just a cold, roaring emptiness. I pushed the bike faster. leaving the town lights behind, heading out onto the dark country roads that wound through the Ohio farmland. A cold, miserable rain began to fall, not a downpour, but a steady, chilling drizzle that slicked the asphalt and blurred the world in front of me. I was running from my mother's face, from my sister's anger, from the sickening crack of that statue. I remember screaming into the wind, trying to pray, trying to call on the God I had just performed for. God, show them I was right. Just give me a sign. But there was no sign. There was no warm feeling of approval. There was no divine confirmation. There was only the howl of the wind, the spatter of rain on my helmet, and the terrifying absolute silence in my own soul. For the first time since I'd met Pastor Eli, I felt completely and utterly alone. The certainty that had been my armor was gone, and I was just a scared, angry boy on a motorcycle in the rain, racing toward a void. The fear started to creep in then. Not fear of hell, but a more primal fear. The fear of being wrong. The fear of having destroyed everything for nothing. It was on a blind curve, a stretch of road shadowed by old willow trees, that my world ended. I was going too fast, leaning into the turn, when a wall of light erupted in front of me, the twin headlights of a semi-truck. The driver laid on the horn, a deafening, terrifying blast that sounded like the trumpet of judgment. There was no time to think, no time to react. There was only the screech of my own tires trying to find purchase on the wet pavement, the horrifying scream of twisting metal as the front of the truck connected with my bike, and then the sensation of flight. The world tumbled, a chaotic mess of rain and darkness and shattered glass. I remember seeing a canopy of stars for a split second, impossibly clear and beautiful, and then nothing. Just the deafening silence of a life coming to an abrupt, violent stop. That should have been the end, the final deserved consequence for a boy filled with so much hate. If you're still with me, if this journey is speaking to you, it would mean so much if you'd hit that like button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss what happened next. Because what came after the silence, that's where the real story begins. There is no pain in the blackness, no cold. No feeling of rain on my skin or the jagged edge of metal against my bones. There is just nothing. An absence so complete it feels like the universe holding its breath. I wasn't floating. I wasn't falling. I just wasn't. All the noise that had filled my head for months, Pastor Eli's booming voice, my own angry shouts, the roar of the motorcycle, it was all gone, replaced by a silence that was deeper and more profound than any I had ever known. And in that silence I thought, so this is it. This is the end. Hell. I waited for the fire, for the judgment I had so gleefully promised to others. I waited for the condemnation I knew, in the deepest part of my soul, that I deserved. But it never came. Instead, a single point of light appeared in the vast emptiness, then another, and another, until the blackness was torn away, replaced by a swirling, breathing tapestry of stars. It wasn't like looking up at the night sky. It was like being in the sky. I was among them, these silent, burning witnesses to all of creation. The beauty of it was so overwhelming, so absolute, that it brought with it an agony of understanding. I saw the intricate, perfect order of it all, the divine mathematics of galaxies and nebulae, and in that moment, I saw myself for what I truly was, a tiny, insignificant speck of dust who had dared to think he understood the mind of God. My arrogance, my certainty, my whole crusade felt so small, so foolish, so profoundly childish in the face of this cosmic cathedral. The shame was a physical sensation, a crushing weight that I thought would annihilate me completely. And then I felt it. It wasn't a voice, it wasn't a vision of a woman in a blue robe. It was a warmth. It started in the center of my chest and spread through the void I occupied, pushing back the cold, erasing the shame. It was a presence, gentle and impossibly strong. It felt feminine, maternal. It was the feeling of a mother's hand on a feverish forehead. It was the feeling of being held after a nightmare. It was a love so pure and unconditional that it made no logical sense. I hadn't earned it. I didn't deserve it. I was a monster who had shattered a symbol of this very love, who had broken his own mother's heart. I braced myself for the rebuke, for the deserved anger. But there was none. In that warmth, I didn't see my life flash before my eyes, but I felt it. I felt the cold, hard weight of the tire iron in my hand. I felt the jarring vibration travel up my arm as it struck the plaster. I felt the collective gasp of the town, a single wounded breath. And most vividly, I felt the sharp, silent agony that pierced my mother's heart. A pain so deep it radiated through this strange space and into me. I felt it all, every ounce of the hurt I had caused, and as I did, this loving presence didn't pull away. It drew closer. It cradled the broken, ugly thing that was my soul. It didn't offer words of forgiveness. It was forgiveness. It was a silent communication that said, "I know, I see all of it, and I love you anyway. You are still my child." The pride that had been my armor for so long didn't just crack. It dissolved into nothing. And for the first time in my adult life, I wept. Not tears of anger or self-pity, but tears of profound, heartbreaking gratitude. The first sensation to return was the cold. A deep, biting cold, seeping into me from the wet asphalt. Then the pain, a blinding, white-hot explosion in my leg and my chest. I heard a voice, muffled and distant. "We've got a pulse. He's alive. I can't believe he's alive." My eyes fluttered open to a world of flashing red and blue lights, distorted by the rain that was still falling on my face. A man in a paramedic's uniform was leaning over me, his face a mixture of shock and concentration. "Son, can you hear me? Don't try to move. We're going to take care of you." I could see the wreckage of my motorcycle a few yards away, a twisted, unrecognizable sculpture of metal. The front of the semi-truck was dented in, its lights still blazing into the dark woods. The paramedic turned to his partner. "Look at that bike. Look at the truck. He shouldn't be breathing. It's a miracle." That word, miracle. It hung in the air, a bridge between the world of stars I had just left and this world of pain and flashing lights. I was broken, shattered in more ways than one, but for the first time, I felt the possibility of being pieced back together. If this moment of grace, this impossible survival, has touched you in some way, it would mean the world to me if you'd hit that like button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happened when I finally woke up in the hospital, and the long road that began from there. Waking up in a hospital bed is a disorienting experience. The world comes back in pieces. The rhythmic beep of a machine, the sterile smell of antiseptic, the dull, throbbing ache that seems to radiate from every bone in your body. For the first few days, I was adrift in a fog of pain medication and confusion. But as the fog began to lift, something far more agonizing than my shattered leg and broken ribs took its place. My own thoughts. The voice of Pastor Eli, a voice that had once been my rock, now became my tormentor. It whispered in the quiet of the night, twisting my experience into something I could understand, something that fit the neat, angry box I had built for my faith. "It was the trauma, Arthur," the voice would say. "The brain does strange things when it's dying. It creates comforting illusions, a final mercy before the end. You saw what you wanted to see." I clung to that explanation like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. It was logical. It made sense. A hallucination, a trick of the light caused by a dying mind. It was so much easier to believe that than to accept the terrifying alternative, that my entire worldview, the foundation upon which I had proudly and violently stood, was utterly and completely wrong. I would lie there staring at the acoustic tile ceiling and try to reconstruct my certainty. "God is a jealous God," I'd repeat to myself, the old phrases coming back like a catechism. "Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image." I tried to feel the old fire, the righteous anger, but it was gone. All I felt was the ghost of that warmth, the memory of that unconditional love that had met me in the darkness, and I hated it. I hated it because it felt more real than any sermon I had ever heard. My mother and Sarah came every day. I expected recriminations, anger, maybe even a bitter, "I told you so, I deserved it." But they gave me none of that. Sarah would bring me books and fuss over my pillows, her anger from that night replaced by a quiet, worried concern. My mother, she would just sit in the uncomfortable plastic chair by my bed for hours. Sometimes she'd talk about the weather, or a neighbor's new puppy, but mostly she was silent, and in her silence she would pray. Her hands, worn from a lifetime of work and love, would move almost unconsciously over the beads of her rosary. The quiet, rhythmic click was a constant sound in that room. I would watch her, my heart a knot of shame and confusion. I remembered screaming at her about those very beads, calling them a pagan talisman. And here she was, using them to pray for the son who had caused her so much pain. The hypocrisy of it all was a physical weight on my chest, heavier than any of my injuries. One afternoon, the nurse came in to change my bandages, and my mother and Sarah stepped out into the hallway. When they came back in, my mother was distracted, talking to a doctor about my recovery timeline. She left a little while later, and it wasn't until the evening that I noticed it. Lying on the small bedside table, next to a plastic cup of water, was her rosary. She must have set it down and forgotten it. My first instinct was revulsion. It was the symbol of everything I had fought against. It was a tool of deception, a graven image. I could hear Pastor Eli's voice again, loud and clear, "Do not touch the unclean thing." But then I remembered the stars. I remembered the feeling of being held and forgiven when I deserved only damnation. If you've ever felt that kind of battle inside yourself, that war between what you were taught and what you have experienced, please take a moment to hit that like button and ring the notification bell. It truly helps, and you'll want to see how this one small act changed the entire course of my life. My hand trembled as I reached for it. It was a simple thing, made of dark wooden beads and a small worn silver crucifix. It felt cool and smooth in my palm. My fingers, clumsy and weak, traced the shape of the cross. I didn't know the prayers, I didn't know the mysteries. I'd spent so much time and energy condemning this object, yet I knew nothing about it. I just held it. I closed my eyes, shutting out the sterile white room, and I tried to find my way back to that place, not the crash, not the pain, but the silence, the stars, the warmth. I didn't pray to God for answers. I didn't ask for a sign. I just held that rosary, the symbol of my mother's gentle, enduring faith, and I whispered into the quiet of the room to a presence I couldn't name but could no longer deny. "I'm sorry," I said. "I was wrong. I'm so sorry." A single tear escaped my eye and traced a hot path down my temple, and in that moment a flicker of it returned. Not a vision, not a voice, just a quiet, profound sense of peace, a gentle warmth in my chest. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a homecoming. My old world, the one built on pride and certainty, didn't just crack. It turned to dust and blew away, leaving me naked, ashamed, and for the first time truly open to grace. Leaving that hospital was like being born again at 20 years old, but this time with a body full of metal pins and a soul full of questions. Learning to walk again was a slow, agonizing process. Each step with the crutches sent a jolt of fire up my leg, a constant physical reminder of my crash. But that pain was nothing compared to the challenge of navigating the world I had left behind. News in a small town travels faster than gossip, and the story of Arthur, the boy who smashed the Virgin Mary and then miraculously survived a head-on collision with a semi-truck, was the talk of the town. And everyone had a theory. My old friends from Pastor Eli's church were the first to come calling. They didn't see a miracle. They saw a deception. They'd sit in my mother's living room, their Bibles open, their faces etched with a grim concern that felt more like an accusation. "Arthur, you were at death's door," one of them said, his voice low and urgent. "The devil is clever. He'll use your trauma, your fear, to plant a seed of doubt. He'll show you a false light, a comforting lie to pull you away from the truth. They spoke of the warmth I felt as a seductive spirit, the stars as a demonic illusion. They tried to pull me back into their world of black and white, but I couldn't go. The colors I had seen in that void were too vivid. When they pressed me, demanding I renounce the experience, all I could say over and over again was, "It was the most real thing that has ever happened to me." The conviction in my own voice surprised even myself. I wasn't shouting, I wasn't arguing. I was just bearing witness to a truth that now lived in my bones. Others were less spiritual in their dismissal. Neighbors would see me slowly making my way down the street and offer their own armchair diagnoses. "The brain does funny things when it's starved of oxygen, you know," one of them told me, with a knowing little nod. Near-death experiences, they call them. A final beautiful hallucination. It was a neat scientific box to put it all in. A coincidence, a trick of the mind. And a part of me, the old, logical Arthur, wanted to believe them. It would have been so much easier. But their explanations felt like trying to describe a symphony by just listing the notes. They missed the music entirely. They couldn't explain the peace. They couldn't explain the forgiveness. So I would just smile, a sad, knowing smile, and say, maybe. But it was the most real thing that has ever happened to me. I wasn't trying to convince them. I was reminding myself the hardest part was finding a place to belong. I couldn't go back to Pastor Eli's church. The fire and brimstone now sounded like the clanging of an empty drum. But the Catholic Church, that was my mother's world, a place I had desecrated with my words and my actions. How could I ever show my face there? Yet I felt a pull I couldn't explain. One Tuesday afternoon, when I knew it would be empty, I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of St. Michael's. The air inside was cool and smelled of old wood, wax, and a faint hint of incense. Light filtered through the stained glass windows, painting the empty pews in jewel tones of ruby and sapphire. My eyes were drawn to the statues lining the walls, St. Francis with a bird on his shoulder, St. Anthony holding the child Jesus. And in a small alcove, a statue of the Virgin Mary, her hands open in a gesture of welcome. I didn't see an idol. I saw a story. I saw a reminder. I saw a window into the same gentle, loving presence that had met me in the dark. I just sat in a back pew for an hour, not praying, just breathing. For the first time since the accident, I felt like I was home. A year passed. A year of physical therapy, of quiet conversations with my mother, of learning to listen more than I spoke. It was a year of slowly, humbly piecing my life back together. And then, it was Christmas Eve again. The town square was filled with the same scent of pine, the same sound of carols. A new nativity scene had been built, and a new statue of Mary, donated by a neighboring parish, stood in the center. My mother and Sarah stood with me, and this time I wasn't looking for an idol to destroy. I was just looking at the faces of my family, glowing in the soft light, and my heart was so full of gratitude it ached. The mayor finished his speech, and just before the tree was lit, he said, "This year we have someone who has asked to say a few words." And he looked right at me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked to the small podium, my limp more pronounced than usual. A hush fell over the crowd. I saw the faces of my old church friends, confused and wary. I saw my neighbors, curious. I saw the lifelong Catholics, their expressions unreadable. I took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone. A year ago, on this night, I stood in this same spot, I began, my voice shaking just a little. But I wasn't here to celebrate. I was here to destroy. My heart was full of pride and a terrible, blinding certainty. I thought I was a soldier for God, but I was just an angry, frightened boy. I broke more than a statue that night. I broke a tradition. I broke the trust of this community, and I broke my mother's heart. And for that, to every single one of you, and especially to my family, I am so deeply sorry. I paused, and in the silence I could hear someone softly crying. I thought I was fighting for God, I continued, but I didn't know the first thing about him. Because that same night after I ran from the mess I made, God found me. He found me in the wreckage of a motorcycle on a cold, dark road. And he didn't show me judgment. He didn't show me anger. He showed me a mercy so profound it undid me completely. He showed me a mother's love, the very thing I rejected, the very symbol I shattered with my own 2 hands. That is what lifted me from the pavement. That is what pieced me back together. I looked at the new statue, at her serene, forgiving face. I'm not here tonight to tell you what to believe. I spent too much of my life doing that. I'm just here to say that I was blind, and now I see. I learned that faith isn't a sword to wield against others. It's a hand to help them up. It's not about being right, it's about being loved. This journey from hate to grace is a story I felt called to share, a testament to the idea that no one is beyond the reach of mercy. If it's touched your own story of faith, if it has resonated in your heart in any way, I would be so honored if you'd hit that like button and ring the notification bell to continue this journey with me. It truly helps this message reach others who might need to hear it. And in the comments below, I'd love to hear not just where you're from, but where you are on your own journey. What has mercy looked like for you? Your story matters, and sharing it might just be the light someone else needs to see in the dark. Thank you for listening.